check 1 2 3. Hello, 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 hello. Hello. Hello, mic check 1 2 3. Hello, 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 hello. Hello. Hello, mic check 1 2 3. Hello.
Please be seated and switch off your mobile phones. Honorable Chief Guest, who is Judge of Supreme Court of India, and our chairperson, please be seated now. Honorable Chief Guest, who is Judge Supreme Court of India, Mr. Justice P.S.Narasimha Rao, Chairperson, Professor Shashi Prabha Kumar, and Director, IIAS, and Vice Chancellor, IGNOU, Professor Nageshwar Rao, and our National Fellow, Dr. Harpal Singh, and our librarian, Mr. Premchand, distinguished guests present in the hall, and who joined us online. A very good afternoon, and warm welcome to the 25th Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture, which is the most important annual academic event of the Institute. To honor the Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, who for his gift of Rashtrapati Niwas to IIAS. He was the main guiding force behind the establishment of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. So we are also celebrating Azadi का अमृत महोत्सव. So बौद्धिक आज़ादी भी एक आज़ादी है, and intellectual freedom is a significant point which is spelled out in the vision of the Institute. And constitutional fraternity, जैसा कि संवैधानिक भाईचारा है, वो भी राष्ट्र की एकता और अखंडता के लिए एक अमृत का काम करता है. So now I invite our chief guest, Honorable Justice Mr. P.S.Narasimha Rao, and the dignitaries present on the dais to please light the lamp. Now I invite Director IIAS for the welcome address.
Good afternoon to all of you. On the eve of 25th Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture, Honorable Mr. Justice P.S. Narasimha ji, Judge, Supreme Court of India, Chairperson, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, Professor Shashi Prabha Kumar, Professor Singh, Tagore Fellow, my own colleague Premchand ji, distinguished fellows, associates, and the guests. Today, we are happy to receive Honorable Mr. Justice P.S. Narasimha ji, who is going to deliver 25th Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture on constitutional fraternity. most of us are aware about the Constitution, but how this Constitution is going to promote our fraternity, our interpersonal relationship, rights and duties which are enshrined in the Constitution, how they help us to be together. That is the crux of the issue on which Honorable Justice Narasimha ji is going to speak to us. Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan is known to us. He is the second president of our republic and fondly remembered as the greatest teacher. And that is why most of us celebrate the 5th September as the Teacher's Day. Our fellows and associates, they come over here to use their knowledge, experience, the research, and the wisdom to find out newer and finer things in the domain of the knowledge. This is one of the peculiar institute and widely recognized all over the globe, wherein the fellows and the associates, their ability to think freely and thereby converting that free thinking, the open mind thinking, into a viable, empirical, useful research. It is an open environment. The social sciences and the languages, the people, they come over here and interact with each other, go through the material in the library, and come out with their wisdom. And most of their works, they were already being published by the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies and are widely acknowledged all over the globe. People still feel that coming over here and staying even for 2 to 3 days in the library, it's a dream for any academics. Any individual who wants to have the contribution in the field of knowledge in an open atmosphere. Every fellow, every associate is free to think, look at their original ideas, how those original ideas they can be useful for the nation as a whole. For them, today, the memorial lecture to be delivered by Honorable Narasimha ji will be a great treasure of knowledge which can be used for strengthening our research base, our capability to think on the issues of national interest. I know that he is a very, very busy person. And getting time from a sitting judge of Supreme Court, and that too on a working day, is really a dream to many of us. And we are fortunate to have his presence over here. I am not talking about his qualifications. I am not talking about his capabilities. I am not talking about his stature. He is a simple person. He is a noble person. Today we all interacted with him. And in that small interaction we have seen that a man of his stature is so simple to interact any one of us freely. And sharing his valuable experience, the personal experience also. Difficult things he can narrate in simple language. That is his capability. He was a senior advocate in the Supreme Court. And good number of cases he has handled, and still the people wanted him that he should plead their cases. But ultimately he opted for the nation, where his knowledge, the legal knowledge, can help, can strengthen this fraternity, bhaichara. And the basics of Constitution, how that can be used for this fraternity, that is the thrust of his talk. On behalf of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, on behalf of the chairperson, on behalf of all the fellows, associates, and distinguished guests, I welcome him to this institute. And it will be a great honor for us when we will concentrate on his talk, and he has readily agreed also to interact with us also, allowing us to raise a few queries to which he may respond to meet our hunger for knowledge. So I especially welcome you on this great occasion. I welcome you all who spared valuable time for this function, for this memorial lecture. My own colleagues, because chairperson is again a very, very busy person. In spite of her health issues, she could spare valuable time for us and being with us, guiding us in our endeavors also. Welcome you all on this occasion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I request our chairperson to kindly introduce the chief guest to our esteemed audience.
I begin with the Vedic Invocation. Om Bhadram Karnebhihi Shrunuyam Devaah Bhadram Pashyemakshabhiryajatraah Sthirairangaistуштувансастанубhir Vyashemahi Devahitam Yadayuhu. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shanti. May we hear good words from our ears. May we see the noble things with our eyes, and may we live our full life with our strong limbs and live a very happy and enjoyable life. Namah Sarvebhyah Sarvabhyascha. Honorable Justice P.S. Narasimha ji, our chief guest today, respected Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, Director IIAS and Vice Chancellor Indira Gandhi National Open University, and his team of Pro-Vice Chancellors from IGNOU, respected Professor Harpal Singh ji, National Fellow, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, distinguished National Fellows, Fellows and Associates at IIAS, all the dignitaries present here for the program, dear officers and staff members of the Institute who are working with and for the betterment of the Institute, I welcome you all to the 25th Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture Program. Indian Institute of Advanced Studies Shimla, as we all know, it's a premier institute for higher research in the field of humanities and social sciences. The institute was founded in 1965 by the Ministry of Education, Government of India, at the behest of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, the then President of India. He was the first Vice President and the second Vice President of India. We all know that Dr. Radhakrishnan was a scholar, a statesman, and an author of almost 87 books. This building, this heritage building in which we are holding this program, this is which the institute is located in, this was reserved for the exclusive usage of the President of India after independence. But it was the vision and the magnanimous gesture of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, who felt that it will be only used for a few days in the year if it is only reserved for the President. It was known and it is still known as Rashtrapati Niwas. But his wisdom, his vision was executed in the form of this institute because he decided to donate it for academic purposes. And the Ministry of Education, with the guidance of Professor Radhakrishnan, they had a society registered in the name of Indian Institute of Advanced Study. So therefore, when he expired, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, it was decided to hold an annual lecture in his memory. The series started in 1991. Till date, 24 lectures have already been delivered by several scholars, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Justice R.S. Pathak, Justice Leela Seth, Professor D.P. Chattopadhyay, and many more. Today's lecture will also be a tribute to the great scholar of India, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. And this lecture, the 25th Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture, will be delivered by an illustrious son of an illustrious father, Justice P.S.Narasimha, son of late Justice Shri P. Kodanda Ramaiah of Hyderabad. Justice P.S. Narasimha, as Professor Nageshwar Rao has already introduced, within a few hours of interaction, he could make out that he is a very, very simple person. But he is a very qualified person, very experienced legal scholar of India. He studied from the University of Hyderabad and pursued law at the Campus Law Center, Law Faculty of Delhi University in 1988. Enrolled as an advocate in the same year and practiced before the High Court, Civil Courts, and tribunals in Hyderabad and shifted counsel practice to Supreme Court. He has handled a large number of cases, including that of constitution benches before the Supreme Court. During this time, he was appointed as the Commission Counsel for the Justice Chinnappa Reddy Commission. He was a member of the Supreme Court Legal Aid Committee. He was designated as a senior advocate by the full court of the Supreme Court of India in the year 2008. As a senior advocate, he appeared in many public law cases involving constitutional, administrative, and environmental issues. He specialized in laws related to telecom, competition, electricity, and other regulatory jurisdictions. He was the amicus curiae for the forest bench and other cases concerning judicial appointments, fast-track courts, and tribunal laws. He was appointed as the Additional Solicitor General of India in 2014. During that time, he assisted the court as a law officer in several landmark cases, including the NJAC case before the Constitution Bench. He was part of the Indian Supreme Court delegation to the Canadian Supreme Court, where he presented a paper on extradition and the environment. He had the rare opportunity of leading the India team and represented India before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in Hamburg, Germany. He also represented India before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, Hague, in investment treaty arbitration. He was part of the governing body of the National Legal Services Authority of India and closely associated with the Mediation and Conciliation Project Committee of the Supreme Court of India. As a law officer, he was instrumental in constituting and being part of the High-Powered Committee suggesting sweeping changes to the Arbitration Act and proposing a mechanism for institutional arbitration. He is closely associated with the making of law on mediation. He was a member of committees relating to the restructuring of all appellate tribunals and reviewing the legal regime concerning corporate social responsibility. He has also been a member of the Investor Education and Protection Fund Authority. Supreme Court appointed him as a mediator in the BCCI case. He could successfully mediate between the members and the board for holding elections and the constitution of an elected body. He had been on the executive council of many national law universities and other educational institutions. Elevated as a judge of the Supreme Court of India directly from the bar on 31st August 2021. We welcome you, sir, to the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies for delivering this Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture, 25th in the series. But before we invite you, I would like to say that the topic you have chosen for today's lecture is very, very significant. As his nature will reveal, he himself is a very fine human being, and he is not just going to lecture on this concept of fraternity, but he believes in that. I have observed him for past few years closely, and I can say that the Sanskrit saying which goes on, Vidya dadati vinayam, vinayad yati patratam, patratvad dhanam apnoti, dhanad dharmam tatah sukham. He is a great lover of Sanskrit and Sanskriti. Therefore, I would like to say that the topic of fraternity in the working of Indian Constitution, as the Indians know that fraternity for us is innate. It is not to be acquired. We all are born equal and we are all bonded by nature. The Veda proclaims, Shrinavantu Vishve Amritasya Putraha. We are all progeny of the divine. And the very word bandhuta or bandhutvam in Sanskrit, in English we say fraternity. It was translated as brotherhood. Then the question arose, what about sisterhood? But the Sanskrit term bandhutvam is gender neutral. Bandhutvam is derived from the root bandh, to bind, to bond. So bonding. or the connection between one human being and the other. And the Vedic dictum, Puman Pumansam Paripatu Vishwatah. Let one human being protect the other naturally, no force, no law. It is given to us. It is ingrained in our psyche, in Indian mindset. So, fraternity, along with justice, liberty, and equality, is the fourth pillar or of our constitutional morality. It is ingrained in our mind sense since ages, and we are all the same. We are bonded naturally, not only human beings, we are bonded with other living beings also, because here we practice the philosophy of one spirit pervading everyone. Ekam va idam vibabhuva sarvam. So such a significant topic which is required today more than ever. We will be very keen to listen to a scholarly, legal luminary, Shri P.S.Narasimha ji, and he's very busy, we know, but I am also very sure that he couldn't say no to me. So thanks again. Thank you so much. And I welcome you. Before we invite you for delivering a lecture, it is our pleasure to felicitate you on behalf of the Institute.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for these valuable insights. Now I would request our chairperson to kindly felicitate our chief guest. Please come. This is a maple tree. This sapling is propagated in our own nursery at IIAS. So it's an ornamental tree, and it's colorful leaves. That is, they are very attractive, and it has some medicinal properties also. Thank you, sir. Now I would request our director to kindly honor the chief guest. Sorry, sir. I am taking the honor to call upon our chief guest, Mr. Justice P.S.Narasimha, to kindly enlighten the audience with his precious words.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. Professor Shashi Prabha Kumarji, Chairman, who had been my guru, from whom I have learnt my lessons on Nyaya, one of the important darshanas of India. She taught me through Tarka Sangraha, and also she taught me Gautama Nyaya. I am waiting for the day when I will demit office and commence my tutelage under her once again. Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, had a very kind words for me to say. Thank you very much, sir. Professor Singh, Mr. Prem Chandji. I can't tell you in words how much honored I am to be standing at this podium on the 25th Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture. When Professor Shashi Prabha Kumarji asked me, she is very right to say that she knew that I wouldn't say no, and I also knew that I can't say no to her. Having accepted it, when I started collecting my thoughts and thinking about what to speak about, I looked at the website of this institution, and having seen the stalwarts who had spoken earlier, I started shivering, and I immediately remembered Swami Vivekananda, what he did when he was about to address the World Conference at Chicago. So he only remembered that Maunam Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Grim. A dumb person can speak and a lame can cross mountains on the blessings. And the blessings, I think, were from none other than Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan himself. As I looked further on the website and saw his vision document, I was very clear in my mind that the idea that I had about the working of the Constitution and how it is supposed to work and the objective all our constitutional fathers had when they were making the Constitution is exactly nothing but constitutional fraternity. I have come here today to speak to you about an idea, about a thought, which I want to share with all of you. Unlike speaking to students of a law school, where it would have been a kind of a lecture, or to tell them our experience of a subject or our practice as law, today I have before me people who have been former vice chancellors of so many universities, who have been academics in the academic for a very long period. All of you are so very accomplished. There are fellows here, there are Tagore fellows here. With you, I can do nothing more than place before you the idea that I had on the basis of the experience I gathered over some years in my legal practice. This relates to the question as to how do we understand our rights, because there is a problem there. The way the rights have worked out have very importantly given us protection against state excesses. But two things about exercise of rights as against the power of a state and exercise of rights inter se has, while it protected us substantially, has also given rise to certain amount of a strife, because there seemed, as they were understood and interpreted, that there is perhaps some kind of a conflict between the exercise of a right and the state power and exercise of rights inter se. I'll explain this. Individual rights of persons or freedoms were contrasted with the obligation of a state to create an equal society. So there is a competing interest, or in other words, a direct conflict itself, where the state seek to provide and enable and increase the economic status of many people who are below the poverty line. This action of a state will naturally come in conflict with the freedom of an individual. That you would have seen in many cases concerning, take for example, with the commencement of the Constitution, we wanted to distribute land to landless poor, which meant reduction of the title holding of people who own the land. So therefore, there was a conflict between the right to hold property and the power of a state to create an equal society. Issues such as right to speech and expression created strangely inter se conflict, because it led to one section or one individual feeling hurt with the speech and expression which was exercised by somebody as a fundamental right to speech and expression. If these rights come in conflict, what is the solution is the first question. If it is a power exercised by the state, then the Constitution provided that the rights are absolute, very correctly, and state's power to limit them is very limited. So the question was as to how do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile also issues relating to creating equal society, distribution of, and provision for reservation for sections in educational institutions? These are also issues which have created competing interests. It is that issue which needs to be discussed, and all through the jurisprudence is that these two rights, the right of freedom on the one hand and the power of a state to create an equal society on the other hand, inevitably and invariably cause conflict. And there is no other solution to that. The conflict is resolved only by a court which is asked to decide as to whose right will prevail, or the power of a state will prevail over the right of an individual. The thought I have brought before you to think about is to give a slightly different dimension to it, which I think is a perspective that India and Indian people in this subcontinent can vouchsafe for. It is in our own living that perhaps there could be an answer to this conflict. And this, I would place before you, is a possibility on the basis of the third principle of fraternity, which is a medium through which the conflict between equality and public good on the one hand and freedoms on the other hand can be resolved. One other very interesting thing which comes out of this discussion, which will take you invariably to another principle, which is the definition of fraternity. What if fraternity is a principle which can reconcile conflicts? Then what exactly is fraternity? With fraternity, what is brought about between people? we need perhaps to redefine fraternity. This is the second point which I place before you, as against what it was understood to be all through in the Western world and Western philosophy and their jurisprudence. This is yet again, I think, a contribution which India can make, and a contribution perhaps a great institution like this can research and bring about a solution to resolve conflicts of this nature. For the purpose of understanding, let us start with this definition of fraternity itself. And to understand fraternity, one must very clearly realize that it is very closely associated with identity. Fraternity is something which can be said to be a kind of a bonding. Let us start with a general definition. A bonding as brotherhood, as most of brotherhood as Western scholars have defined, or even bandhutva as Professor Shashi Prabha has stated, some kind of a relationship. A relationship which recognizes the other person and adjusts itself to the presence and existence of that person's, automatically brings about some kind of a recognition of him, and that other person's identity is recognized. Once you recognize the identities of as another person, then you bring about some amount of dignity in his presence. It is natural and inevitable. This is the consequence. So to start with, what was therefore the identity of India, in which what kind of a relationship prevailed between Indians, and what was the identity of that group of Indians by itself, as it originally existed, and we'll move on from the position, as it were, relating as back as possible, and as the time constraint, we jump to the time at least till recent past when we were affected by colonialism. The identity of us during the period of colonialism, thereafter the process of making of the constitution, how did we realign, how did we understand ourselves with the long past and also the immediate past, with the scars that British rule over 300 years had cast on us, and with the discussions that we had in the Constituent Assembly, what kind of a value that we have incorporated in the Constitution. And finally, let us discuss also, since last 70 and odd years after the Constitution has come into force, as to how we understood this identity of ours. And from that onward, from that I think we will be able to realize what we are as a nation, number one, and if we are as a nation in a particular way, then is it possible for us to reconcile this conflict in the exercise of rights and in our living also. This is the sum and substance of what I endeavor to do. I am not used to reading from a written text. As a lawyer also, I never did it. But there are certain passages which are really necessary for us to understand as to what really we were. And I thought the best thing is to refer to the passage of none other than Radhakrishnan in his introduction to Indian philosophy. We are now talking about what he considered to be the land from at the beginning in which so much of philosophy flourished? There must be some reason. As he poses the question, there must be some reason. Why is it that so much of knowledge evolved at that time? There is a picturesque description about the geography of India, covered all around on the top with the Himalayas and other things. I read that rich culture is impossible with a community of nomads where people struggle for life and die for privation. Fate called India to a spot where nature was free with her gifts and every prospect was pleasing. India never felt that the world was a field of battle where men struggle for power, wealth, and domination. When we do not need to waste our energies on problems of life on earth, exploiting nature and controlling the forces of nature, we begin to think of higher life, how to live more perfectly in spirit. Helped by the natural conditions and provided with the intellectual scope to think out the implications of things, India escaped the doom of what Plato pronounced to be the worst of all, that is hatred of reason. He has arrived at the point. He's saying that what really marks the presence of India and its existence was its endeavor or desire to proceed and find exactly the reason. Reason for very many things, including the reason for our existence, which is what propelled people to find out the cause of our existence. This last is a very important extraction from his statement. External invasions and internal dissensions came very near crushing its civilization, that is Indian civilization, many times in history. The Greeks, the Persians, the Mughal, French, English have by turn attempted to suppress it, and yet it has its head held high. India has not been finally subdued, and its old flame of spirit is still burning. Throughout its life, it has been living with one purpose. He is arriving at the point again. It has fought for truth and against error. It may have blundered, but it did what it felt able to call upon to do. The history of Indian thought illustrates the endless quest of the mind, ever old, ever new. I think that spirit continues because, as you see in the present world also, how things have changed in the recent past in various subjects, electronics or law, various other sciences also, that in many places that Indians are in the forefront, and is not without any reason. It is only for the civilizational existence where reasoning had become very important for us. Very interestingly, I didn't, by chance I have stumbled upon it. In one of those statements in Bhagavad Gita, there is a reference where a god, the Krishna is, as we understand, is the godhood where Arjuna is the man, is the human. So that's the dialogue between the maker and the made. So one statement, Adhyatma Vidya Vidyanam Vadah Pramuditamaham. Of all the arguments, I am the best argument. I am the best argument is the definition which the Gita says about what godhood is. It's very extraordinary for the reason that one of the important books defines godhood as the best reason. Radhakrishnan defines this as a dialectic. He says that in a debate I am a dialectic, which is I am the reason of a debate. It comes exactly close to what he says. It is this identity as it existed much before we came to be ruled upon. Disastrous consequences were seen, and what happened to the Indian identity during the colonial period is another factor which is of extreme importance to us. Large number of scholars have spoken about it. They have spoken about it not in the context of territoriality which was taken over upon the commencement of the colonialism. The after effects of coloniality, which were psychological in nature. What it did to the Indian mind, what it did to us, what kind of an identity that it created in all of us is yet another very, very important phase in our lives which came to be noted by large number of authors. I had noted very many scholarly works in which people have with great amount of detail stated what kind of a psychological effect it had. We are perhaps the second generation after the independence. The kind of confidence that we have is different from our predecessors, our fathers, who were at the cusp of independence. And we were on our own. And after us, our children have their own confidence. I could see very many great scholars of India sitting, who were earlier generation, just sitting next to a white man would fumble. Not because intellectually they were inferior, but it had the psychological effect on being told repeatedly that we were not as equals, or we were rather inferiors. That situation is slowly eroding after 70 years of independence. That psychological effect during the entirety of the colonial period, which was a very important aspect which crept into the freedom movement, whereby we come to the third phase where we review our identities. And during this freedom movement, what was thought to be an impossible experiment to bring the Indians together, and what was so very easy for the British to create dissensions amongst us, very strangely and in a rather innovative way, in an extraordinary measure, our freedom fighters could convert that into an asset. They brought all that together to build a movement. And all that is something which was never articulated in a particular way, but it was only utilized as to draw out dissensions against one against another. There's one beautiful statement in Bipin Chandra. The national movement played a pivotal role in the historical process through which the Indian people got formed into a nation or a people. National leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Surendranath Banerjee, Tilak, Gandhiji, Nehru accepted that India was not yet a fully structured nation, but a nation in the making, and that one of the major objectives and functions of the movement was to promote the growing unity of the Indian people through a common struggle against colonialism. The process of nation in the building was never counterposed to the diverse regional, linguistic, ethnic identities of India. On the contrary, the emergence of the national identity and the flowering of other narrower identities were seen as processes deriving strength from each other. That is exactly what has happened. National movement fully recognized the multifaceted diversity of Indian people. It was fully grasped that common subjugation There was a common, that is another factors on the basis of which we built upon. Irrespective of you were either in Kashmir or in Kerala or Kanyakumari or Northeast, that subjugation, which was all through of the colonial rule, provided the material and emotional basis for nation making, and that one of the functions of the movement was to structure the nation through a common struggle against colonialism. Furthermore, it was clearly understood that the objective of unifying the Indian people into a nation would have to be realized by taking into account regional, religious, caste, ethnic, linguistic, and other differences. You would have seen that Indian National Congress constituted people from all over the country, and that was not an exception. Every political party during the freedom movement drawn people from the length and breadth of India, and they were from various other communities, had nothing commonality amongst them, but this is what brought them together. And all this all Indianness was not a feature peculiar about Indian National Congress. To the nationalist leaders, the notion of a structured nation did not contradict its unity. Given this diversity, the leaders of the national movement realized that the Indian nation had to be built on a very broad foundation. But then commonalities were taken together. In the nature of our existence, in the nature of what affected us, in the nature of what was denied to us, in the nature of what we were deprived of. Those were the scars which were common and far deeper than what our existence was. The loss of recognition of what we were, the loss of dignity in our living was one of the most important factors which brought us together. But however, there was still a problem, and that related to the differences that we had. This is yet another extraordinary experiment that freedom fighters have undertaken, no parallel anywhere in the universe, that stitching the length and breadth of India together, the differences became the strengths, and at the same time they had to take some measure with respect to those differences which were being exploited by the British. It was, however, recognized that the diversity of India could also be a source of weakness. Diversity could be used for divisive purposes and transformed into disruptive tendencies such as communalism, casteism, linguistic and regional exclusiveness. The problem of integrating diverse loyalties was therefore quite a real problem. So it is in this context that they had undertaken some constructive work. Constructive work in the sense of an act which would have had psychological effect on the people, would have given rise to a feeling that the differences are minor, but commonalities are more. Why I am saying all this is that you should realize that this is actually an effort. This is an expression, an idea which was thought about. It was realized that there is a problem, and solutions were thought about, and they were implemented. It is not like constructing a huge institution. It is working on the mind of Indians. And it's a cohesive way in which the freedom fighters had thought about the idea and worked on it bit by bit. Constructive work organized around the promotion of khadi, national education, Hindu-Muslim unity, boycott of foreign cloth and liquor, social upliftment of Harijans and the tribal people, and the struggle against untouchables formed an important part of nationalist strategy, especially during the constitutional phases. It is in the aftermath of the non-cooperation movement of the early 1920s, Lajpat Rai considered the demands of nationalist politics and the possibility of Hindu-Muslim unity. He saw a joint enterprise between communities as not the merger or the absorption of one into the other, but the integration of all into the whole without in any way injuring or lessening each group individuality. There is yet another aspect of it, after which I will not be troubling you by reading anything from the written text, which very beautifully expresses the important aspect relating to the inaugural movement of national reconstruction of Indian history was the idea of fundamental unity of India. Sometimes that had long been assumed, this notion was now advanced in opposition to the colonialist assertions about the impossibility of uniting Indians as a scientific and demonstrable truth. The fundamental, essential unity of India was based, as it said, on the natural geographical boundaries that surrounded the subcontinent and marked it off from the world. This geographical wholeness explains one of the crucial features of Indian history that urged the political unification in defiance of vast distances and immense difficulties in transport and communication. Part of the demonstrations of the feeling of oneness and the common cultural heritage of all Indians was provided by the old argument about the openness and tolerance of Indian civilization. Again, this is a feature which was again drawn out by some of the scholars from out of the historical background, utilized it, connected it, and ensured that that integrity came back. And what is that most important? That openness and tolerance of Indian mind for ideas. If we think deeper, it doesn't need any scholastic expression or a kind of lessons to be taken. If you think deeper, I think by its very nature, the tolerance, in fact, one of the very important judgments of the Supreme Court, where after all the issues relating to contest between the rights were considered, the last sentence of the judgment of the court says, "We were a tolerant society, let us keep it." That's the last word of the court. But need is there to trace it. From where has it come? Unless you know where is the origin of that tolerance in you and me, and how we have enabled it to continue, we might forget or we might not use it. So there is a need for a research and understanding of a great quality. I am emphasizing this, of a great quality, a great character, great principle, which without realizing has formed part of us. Form part of us. That is what we need to know. Then finally, with this situation, as it were, we moved on, obtained our independence. British were out, and we were there to make our constitution. We had the Constituent Assembly, which worked for almost 2.5 years, and most of the former presidents, quite a few, Zakir Hussain, Radhakrishnan, whose pictures are there, the great people of our nation, they participated in the deliberations of the Constituent Assembly. And the Constituent Assembly debates are replete with the experiences that they had during the freedom movement. All those persons who participated in the freedom movement recollected and said, this is the experience, this is how we brought about independence. This is how we fought for our rights. This is how we were suppressed. This is how we were put in jail. This is how our knowledge was suppressed. This is how our books were burnt. Therefore, we must make sure that such things don't happen again. Make guarantees for that. The joint fight was extremely important for them. And what India lost was again extremely important for them to bring them back. So constitutional debates talk about our identities, the scars that were carried, and therefore what needed to be done. So, two things, very importantly, which formed part of the constitutional debate. One is, for the present purposes, we deal with the discussion with respect to the kind of governance that we should have, the kind of guarantees about our rights which should have, and the way in which we should exercise our rights. And the Constitution realized that this is an entity in which there were so much of diversity. Everybody must have a recognition in it. Identity must be in it. So therefore, the Constitution provided all that. Radhakrishnan, on the almost at the eve of the in the last day when before Ambedkar gave his speech, this is the statement of Radhakrishnan. Again, you will see in this the essence of what India is, what the identity of India is, and from which whether we will be able to draw something for understanding what this concept of fraternity is, I will leave it to you. But I will read this, you can understand. Were we not victims, he asks, ready victims, so to say, of the separatist tendencies foisted on us? Should we not now correct our national faults of character, our domestic disposition, our intolerance, which has assumed the different forms of obscurantism, of narrow-mindedness, superstitions, and bigotry? I would like, therefore, to take this opportunity to call for self-examination, for a searching of hearts. We can best serve our country by removing these fundamental defects which have prevented us from giving the objective of a free and united India. So it's a take from this, and let us work for a free and a united India. The cultural cleavages are the more dangerous. We should now not allow them to grow. What we should do is to preserve those cultural ties, those spiritual bonds which knit our people together into one organic whole. Patient consideration. Look at the prescriptions which become again relevant. Patient consideration. If we mark this, we will get to know the work ahead of us, what we need to do, which we perhaps are not doing. Patient consideration, slow process of education. I really liked this institution very much because there are no exams, number one. That's the best part of it. You are not reportable to anybody. You can work for 2 years and submit a report. No comment on your report. Nobody would judge you. This is how the freedom of learning should be. Slow process of education, as against what exactly? Compressed educations. We have adjustment of one another's needs, discovery of points of view which are common to both the dominions and matters of communications of defense and foreign affairs, that's between state and union. These are the things which should be allowed to grow. I am quoting from him, allowed to grow in the daily business of life and administration. It is by developing such attitudes that we can once again draw near and gain the lost identity. Our pledge tells us that this ancient land shall attain her rightful and honorable place, still responding to the thrill of the great idea. Civilization is a thing of the spirit. Please mark this. Again, it's a psychological principle that he is talking about. It's not about building institutions or statues or whatever. It is talking about civilization is a thing of the spirit. It is not something external, solid and mechanical. It is the dream of the people's hearts. It is the inward aspiration. Inward aspiration, I will come to this word when we try and understand fraternity. Inward aspiration of people's souls. It is the imaginative interpretation of the human life and the perception of mystery of human existence. That is what civilization actually sounds for. And Swarajya is the development of the kind of tolerant attitude which sees in brothers man the face of brother, the face of the divine. Two more words. He uses the expression humility, which I think can be slightly modified as selflessness. The note of selflessness means the unimportance of the individual and the supreme importance of the unfolding purpose which we are called upon to serve. Why I have said this, the last word is an extremely important thing, which will now straight we go to the point that we are trying to, the search that we are making. He talks about an individual and is speaking about unimportance of the individual. It's rather strange perhaps. When we talk of rights, we are talking of individuals. We are talking of asserting our rights. Rights are always for assertion. What he is speaking about, unimportance of the individual, in the sense that he talks about lessening of the self-ego of an individual for his self-promotion and to see his progress or his betterment or even his living in what he calls unfolding purpose which we are called upon to serve. Purpose is to establish a nation. That is the essence of the last speech of Ambedkar. Then you all know what our history, modern history thereafter is. We made our constitution. And constitution, as you all know, is a document which primarily distributes powers and declares rights, keeping them away from the encroachment by the government. Broadly speaking, this is for our purposes and general purposes, this much of a definition is sufficient for us. The reason why it distributes powers is, power at one place, if it is absolute, it will deteriorate. Therefore, the power has to be broken. We have created the legislature which makes the laws. We have created the executive which executes the laws that are made. And we have a judiciary which will act as an arbiter to see whether anybody has transgressed the lines drawn by the Constitution. Second most important thing the Constitution does is that it declares the rights. Most essential part of the Constitution is chapter which deals with the fundamental rights. While it declares fundamental rights, which are to be interpreted as absolute in nature, it declares at the same time the limits by which such rights can be restricted by the power of the state. The constitution was made, and after so much of a deliberation, and finally, at the end of it, many had complaints about it, that whether it will work well or not work well. There is a statement of Ambedkar which has become extremely popular, and in our courts we keep referring to it quite often, that relates to that whether constitution will work well or not is not dependent on the constitution. As much defense as could be offered to the constitution has been offered by my friend Alladi Kuppuswamy and Krishnamachari, TTK as we call him. I shall not therefore enter into the merits of the constitution, because, I am quoting Ambedkar, I feel, however good the constitution may be, it is sure to turn out to be bad, because those who are called upon to work happen to be bad lot. However bad the constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot. This is after 2.5 years of deliberation of the Constitution. The working of the Constitution does not depend wholly upon the nature of the Constitution. The Constitution can provide only the organs of a state, I just told you, such as the legislature, executive, and judiciary. The factors on which the working of those organs of a state depend are the people and the political parties. They will set up as their instruments to carry out their wishes and their policies, without reference to that part which people and their parties are likely to play. So then immediately a question arises. If the Constitution, by its very content, does not protect the ideals of the Constitution, then what is all this about then? Second question is, if the Constitution is not able to control achieving the ideals that have been set in the Constitution, and that it depends on the persons who are manning the Constitution, where is that institution in the Constitution or outside the Constitution where you are going to make those kind of persons who will run the Constitution in a good way? There is no such institution. There is no such institution. Then there is a gap. Is there a gap? Constitution is only an organic system. But where does one fall back upon to ensure that the Constitution is working well? And the greatest architect of the Constitution says that depends on how we work it. That's where the question remains. And where is the answer for that? It's not in the Constitution then, it's declared by him. It is in this context, therefore, we see the exercise of power by the state in making laws. It is here we see the exercise of rights by individuals against the state. It is here, therefore, we see how an individual against whom a right is exercised, who is also exercising a right, will coordinate with each other to ensure that the constitutional ideals are achieved. This is the question you all need to research. One idea I can give, that's all, nothing more. Perhaps the previous passages that I have read in the constitutional debates, talking about our identity, talking about the nature of human beings, the nature of Indians in particular, the attitude of tolerance, the attitude of, they have not used that expression, selflessness, but perhaps those, somewhere there the answer lies. And that perhaps is another, because it's a constitution we have. Constitution is a living document. Constitution is not of the past, it is of the present. If you have to say, you will say it through the constitution. And I am saying it through the constitution, trying to understand the working of the constitution through the principle of fraternity, and I am trying to see what fraternity meant and means. I don't need to take, I have gone past my time. I don't need to take any further time in reading the various ideas that the West has propagated in their definition of what fraternity is, which I don't think will suit us. We will have to forge it here. We will have to do it on the basis of what we are, what our culture is, what we are made of, what we want. We need to redefine what our relationship with each other, and then give a definition to the third concept in the preamble, which talks about first principle being equality, which is assured to all individuals. Second principle is about the liberty, which is again assured to everybody. Third is about fraternity, which is said to be unenforceable. You can go to a court and say, my right to speech is restricted. You can go to the court and say, my right to movement is restricted. You can go to the court and ask, my admission to the college is restricted. All these are fundamental rights, court will grant you. If you go to the court and say, I have been treated unequally, I have been discriminated, court will grant you relief. So far as fraternity is concerned, what is it that you want? And what is it that you expect the court to do? This is again a question you must answer. My answer is this. Fraternity, by its very nature, is not enforceable because it is not assertion of a right. By its very nature, fraternity is that part of the human character which relates to his or her selflessness. Most essential and integral part of the Indian ethos. That is the one which shot up and manifested as tolerance. Courts have recognized. But at the bottom, at the origin, is the philosophical content of selflessness as an important feature of human life. Extremely important feature. It manifests when you have to deal with your loved ones who ask you something and without any hesitation you give it. That is where the selflessness comes. But if your neighbor asks, it's a different matter. Because that kind of a relationship doesn't exist, that selflessness doesn't. So therefore, the question is, I don't want to make it legalistic, the question is, as against the Western interpretation of fraternity as a charity, love for brotherhood and so on, we must understand fraternity in the Indian context of knowing its origin as a feature of selflessness. Though Aurobindo also said that fraternity is extremely, Ambedkar said I think it is Aurobindo, yet again great soul of our country, who has perhaps come closest to our definition of fraternity, what I am trying to place before you. He says this, the aim of the religion, I will conclude with this, the aim of religion of humanity was formulated in the 18th century by a sort of primal institution. That aim was and is still to recreate human society in the age of three kindred ideas, liberty, equality and fraternity. None of these has really been won in spite of the progress that has been achieved. Liberty that has been so loudly proclaimed as an essential modern progress is an inward and mechanical and unreal liberty, because you are asserting it. The equality that has been so much sought after and battled for is the equally an outward and mechanical, and will turn out to be an unreal quality. Fraternity, not even claimed, because nobody talks about fraternity, not even claimed to be a practicable principle of ordering life, and what is put forward as its substitute is the outward mechanical principle. Yet, this is what he is answering. Yet is brotherhood the real key of the triple gospel of the idea of humanity? The union of liberty and equality can only be achieved in the power of human brotherhood, and it cannot be founded on anything else. But brotherhood exists only in the soul and in the soul. It can exist by nothing else. For this, brotherhood is not a matter of either physical kinship or vital association or of intellectual agreement. That brotherhood is not the issue here. Intellectual. When the soul claims freedom, it is the freedom of its self-development of the divine in man, in all beings. When it claims equality, what it is claiming is that freedom equally for all and the recognition of the same in soul. When you claim an equality on behalf of all, then it's a different perspective. The same Godhood in human beings. What it strives for brotherhood is, it is founding that equal freedom of self-development on a common aim. Common life, the unity of the mind and the feeling, founded upon the recognition of the inner spiritual unity. These three things are in fact nature of the soul. It is that inner feeling which they tried to stitch together at the time of freedom movement, enabling people to know that your happiness, your freedom, your equality is inextricably wound with those who are your countrymen, and therefore in that perspective you exercise your power or your right to equality. So therefore, in conclusion, I would say that as against a Western concept of a right in its absoluteness and the limits of the power of a state, what could be propagated as fraternity under the Indian Constitution would be the limits, the limit of a state is correct. It cannot proceed any further than the limits of the Constitution, which must very strictly be interpreted. But when an individual exercises the right, he has a choice. It's actually a kind of a freedom. The freedom that one exercises while exercising his liberty is not to exercise in a manner that will injure others. That is the fundamental difference which would come in the exercise of rights and will enable everybody to have the utility and advantage of having a right. And I'll only conclude by one great sage. I think he sums up the whole thing in just 2 words. Somebody asked him, how do we treat others? There are 3 words he used. He said, there are no others. That answers. That answers the question. With this, I thank one and all. I thank Professor for giving me this opportunity. I have taken a little extra time. Pardon me for that. And wish you all the very best. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much, sir, for these words of wisdom. Now we can have interactive session, and fellows and associates who want to interact with the chief guest, they can have their questions, please.
Thank you very much, sir. You have a mic.
I found your presentation extremely fascinating. The way you identified the crisis of constitutional democracy by going back to the history of the Constituent Assembly, and then also showing the path forward by talking about an important principle, namely fraternity, and may I say in our own context, to also talk about sorority, not just brotherhood, but also sisterhood. And I think you quoted Sri Aurobindo, and he had also rightly said that we need to understand the lessons of the French Revolution, which was basically about liberty, and then of course the socialistic or the Bolshevist revolution, which was about equality, and the fact that neither equality nor liberty can be the base of the pyramid. And it is only fraternity, he says, in war and self-determination, an ideal of humanity that can be the basis. I really like the way, for example, a philosophical concept like fraternity has been highlighted by an eminent jurist of your own caliber. I think, to my mind, it's probably the first time such a formulation of an original kind is being suggested. And may I just add, while endorsing all that you said, while quoting Sri Aurobindo and others also, that it is fraternity that is important, I would just offer a caveat, an addition, that he is talking about the religion of humanity. You rightly talked about, and you advocated, the need to invoke our own tradition. I think Sri Aurobindo is far radical than talking about our own tradition. He goes beyond religion, and he's talking about spirituality. And in religion of spirituality, he is not talking about the centrality of any religion. He is talking about the kernel of the spiritual truth itself. And he says this kernel of the spiritual truth can be discovered and can be invested in your own formulation about fraternity when we realize that it is not religion of the conventional kind. It is when we realize that we have a common origin. And the common origin, to my mind, is transcultural. The spiritual truth which remains and lies behind the major religions of the world. And I think that requires a major change in our old worldview itself. So we have to understand what he means by religion of humanity. And while congratulating you, I would say that there needs to be a kind of a new coalition of understanding between this religion of humanity with regard to the fraternity, or what I said, sorority, which is the need of the hour. Thank you very much.
Learned speaker, Justice P.S.Narasimha. I won't spend my time in paraphrasing his lecture. The end words of his lecture, they immediately reminded me of Gurbani, when he said, "There is no other, na ko beri, na hai begana, sagal sang, हमको बनाई." Then I shall just pick 2-3 ideas, particularly that invasions which nearly sent the civilization of India on the brink of devastation, but still it was the greatness or the inner strength of this civilization. Even Dr. Muhammad Iqbal has admitted it, that all other great civilizations are no more seen, but our civilization, it thrives on no end. यूनान, मिस्र, रोमा सब मिट गए यहाँ से, कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी. And the people of the things which struck me best, or I also learned them for the first time from his lecture, that the people who were members of the Constituent Assembly and were instrumental in giving us this great Constitution, they had themselves suffered under the colonial rule, and they felt that no such clause should be there in our Constitution, which represses us, which torments our soul. That speaks why our Constitution has emerged so humanitarian and so great. And last thing, it is my personal compliment and tribute to the learned speaker, that with such learned and good-hearted judges on the bench of the highest justice-giving authority of India, we can feel secure, we can feel and expect justice. Shukriya.
नमस्कार. नमस्कार सर. सर मैं दूरदर्शन हिमाचल से हूं, और सबसे पहले मैं मैं दूरदर्शन हिमाचल से हूं, और सबसे पहले सर मैं आपका स्वागत करना चाहूँगा हिमाचल में, शिमला में आप यहाँ पर आए, और हम सब लोग बहुत सौभाग्यशाली महसूस कर रहे हैं कि आप यहाँ पे आए, और उम्मीद करते हैं आपको भी थोड़ी बहुत ठंड का एहसास ज़रूर हुआ होगा यहाँ आकर. सर मेरा क्वेश्चन आपसे ये रहेगा कि आज आप कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेटर्निटी पे बात कर रहे हैं, यू बीइंग सुप्रीम कोर्ट जज, और योर लॉर्डशिप, मैं ये जानना चाहूँगा, जब हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन फ्रेटर्निटी की बात करते हैं, हम संवैधानिक भाईचारे की जब हम बात करते हैं, हमारी कंट्री का मोटो रहता है यूनिटी इन डाइवर्सिटी. तो क्या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेटर्निटी यानी कि संवैधानिक भाईचारा, जो यूनिटी की हम बात करते हैं, उसको प्रमोट करेगा? और सर आपने एक चीज़ का जिक्र किया, आपने कहा कि जो एक एक्सरसाइज करते हैं हम अपने राइट्स, इंडिविजुअल और स्टेट अलग अलग एक्सरसाइज करते हैं, बट हम ये देखते हैं कि जो एक इंडिविजुअल होता है उसके राइट्स और जो स्टेट्स के राइट्स होते हैं वो अक्सर एक दूसरे से टकराते हैं, और कहीं ना कहीं इस वजह से एक प्रॉब्लम भी क्रिएट होती है एक इंडिविजुअल और एक स्टेट के बीच में. तो क्या उसको भी हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फ्रेटर्निटी से यानी संवैधानिक भाईचारा से रोक सकते हैं? थैंक यू.
ये जो इंडिविजुअल और स्टेट है, उसमें पावर और राइट का कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है. पावर जो है स्टेट का लिमिट करने का, स्टेट का पावर बहुत लिमिटेड है, लेकिन राइट्स एब्सोल्यूट होते हैं. उसमें अगर स्टेट अगर एक्सीड करता है उसका लिमिट से, कोर्ट उसको स्ट्राइक डाउन करेगा ही, करना चाहिए, कर रहा है. तो उसमें फ्रेटर्निटी का बात नहीं आता है, क्योंकि स्टेट एक्सीड हो गया राइट उनका ड्यूटी पे या उनका पावर पे. सो आपका क्वेश्चन का यही आंसर। थैंक यू।
धन्यवाद। मैं यहाँ पर इंस्टीट्यूट में फैमिली के उससे स्टेटस में रह रही हूँ। आपका सुनकर मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा, लेकिन मेरी एक ही बात की क्वेरी है जो मेरे मन में आती है कि भाईचारा बिलोंगिंगनेस पर डिपेंड करता है। जिस समय परिवार में बिलोंगिंगनेस खत्म हो जाती है, उस समय घर का भाईचारा खत्म हो जाता है। तो संविधान इसको बिलोंगिंगनेस को प्रमोट करने के लिए किस प्रकार आगे है, और यदि बिलोंगिंगनेस कोई नहीं समझता है तो उसके लिए संविधान क्या करता है, ये मैं समझना चाहती हूँ। पता नहीं कैसा आप समझाएंगे।
डॉक्टर अंबेडकर का जो स्टेटमेंट था, उन्होंने कहा उसमें कि ये बाहर है, लेकिन इतना भी बाहर नहीं है, क्योंकि कोर्ट जो है वो डेक्लरेशन दी है। क्या करेक्ट है? ये भाईचारा कभी कभी कोर्ट का डेक्लरेशन से भी आ सकता है। एक डिसीशंस देते हैं, अगर कोर्ट का एक डिसीशन है, उस डिसीशन में अगर कोर्ट कहेंगे कि ये, मैंने आपको एक एग्जाम्पल दिया था, कोर्ट ने कहा कि ये टॉलरेंस की बात है, तो ऐसी डिक्लेरेशंस में आएंगे। दूसरा चीज़ जो है, ये टॉलरेंस की बात, इट शुड कम इन द एक्शंस ऑफ इंडिविजुअल्स एंड एक्शंस ऑफ द स्टेट ऑल्सो। जैसा, इसीलिए आई वॉज रिफरिंग टू वेरियस स्टेप्स टेकन ड्यूरिंग द फ्रीडम मूवमेंट, what everybody has done, the freedom fighters, what steps they have taken. Lot of us do, ये नहीं कि हम नहीं करते, काफ़ी लोग करते भी हैं, लेकिन जो करते हैं उसको देख के उसको हाईलाइट करना चाहिए, तब पता चलता है कि, और वो कभी कभी पता भी नहीं लगता है कि ये सेल्फलेसनेस है। काफ़ी लोग करते हैं, हम करते हैं, आप करते हैं, सभी लोग करते हैं, लेकिन इसका रिकॉग्निशन होना चाहिए। अगर जब हम बोलते हैं उसके बारे में, ये प्रमोट होता है, तो सिस्टम कैसा कुछ होता नहीं होगा भी, ऐसा कोई सिस्टम नहीं होगा ये, क्योंकि ये अपना कैरेक्टर की बात है, सेल्फलेसनेस की बात है, ये कोई एसर्शन ऑफ ए राइट नहीं है ना, ये छोड़ देने की बात है। उसका कोई राइट नहीं बनता, अगर आप छोड़ना चाहते हैं तो कौन रोक सकता है आप, लेकिन छोड़ते नहीं, वो छोड़ना चाहिए कि आपका मन की बात है। सो दैट इज व्हाट वी मस्ट रिकॉग्नाइज इन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ ए assertion of a right, that you have a choice not to enforce it unnecessarily or at a time when it is going to injure others. That choice is there.
Sir, I am a creative writer and I have authored some books. मैं ये आपसे सर जानना चाह रहा हूँ कि जो आज देश का माहौल है, जहाँ हेट्रेड है, जहाँ एनिमोसिटी है, जो इनटॉलरेंस है, ऐसे माहौल में क्या आपको लगता है सर, डू यू थिंक देयर इज अ थ्रेट टू द फ्रेटर्निटी? इस माहौल में डू यू परसीव एनी थ्रेट टू आवर फ्रेटर्निटी?
My speech is jurisprudential speech. I can answer your question. But to speak of contemporary political existing situations is unnecessary for me, because my speech overarches as a principle which should be applying everywhere. There are no exceptions.
Your speech was really very enlightening, and you have touched very rare points which we do not expect from the law authorities. Like you have touched about the character, that is very important, and you have touched about the spirituality, which finds generally no place in these kind of systems, but all the more they are very, very important. And what I felt hearing you, that the basis of our secularism and constitution and everything lies in the Vedanta. Ekam sad vipraha bahuda vadanti. If we just follow this, probably many of the problems will be solved. You are also right. I am also right. He is also right. Like in Jainism, that is called Syadvad and Anekantvad. So thank you, sir. It was really very, very, very enlightening.
Thank you.
The last question, please. You also have one?
Yes.
There is no question. I'm Professor Maybe from DU. I'm retired professor. First I would like to congratulate you that you have selected a very good topic, that is the need of the hour. But I would like to remind you and Professor Shashi Prabha also that in the history there was a crown prince known as Dara Shikoh who made efforts in this direction. He himself translated, when he was governor of Allahabad, he himself translated 52 Upanishads of Sanskrit, from Sanskrit into Persian, and that book is available as Sirr Akbar, the Great Secret. And he starts with this couplet that when naam hai unke ur nami na darad, be har nami ki khani sarvarat. मैं उसके नाम से इस किताब की शुरुआत करता हूँ जिसका कोई नाम नहीं है, मगर जिस नाम से पुकारो वो आपकी तरफ अटेंटिव हो जाता है. So these efforts were made earlier also, and you have given a good light, in fact, so light that this is need of the hour, and we should work. Once I went to the Department of Sanskrit, and I wanted to get this Sirr Akbar to work on it. There he has given a number of things. If we go through Maulana Rum's Masnavi, he says insana marzus. Sardar Sahib referred to Allama Iqbal. Iqbal wrote his thesis on Maulana Rum, where he says that insana marzus. The Sheikh Baad Chirag, the Sheikh, कल शेख जी दिन के उजाले में चिराग लिए हुए टहल रहे थे. लोगों ने पूछा क्या ढूंढ रहे हो? कहने इंसान ढूंढ रहा है. कहने वो तो मिलता नहीं है. कहने जो नहीं मिलता उनसे याफ्मीन शवाद आना मार, जो नहीं मिलता है मुझे उसकी तलाश है. तो if we make efforts, we will definitely find a way for the coexistence of all castes, all communities in this nation. Thank you. Again, I am congratulating.
नमस्कार सर. मैं डॉक्टर प्रवीण कुमार अंशुमान, यहाँ पर एसोसिएट हूँ, अंग्रेज़ी विषय का अध्यापक हूँ दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय में. सर, आपका उद्बोधन बहुत ही बेहतरीन रहा और उसके प्रति मैं अपना अनुग्रह प्रकट करता हूँ. एक कमेंट है, उस पर आपका कमेंट चाहूँगा. आपने बाबा साहब भीमराव अंबेडकर का वो वक्तव्य बताया जिसमें वे कह रहे हैं कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन जो है वो पर्याप्त नहीं है, कुछ और चाहिए, और आपने प्रश्न भी हमारे सामने खड़ा किया कि वो क्या है. तो संविधान दिवस पर एक छोटा सा कमेंट मैंने फेसबुक पर लिखा था, उसमें उसका जवाब है. मैं आपसे जानना चाहूँगा कि वो जवाब सही है या कुछ और जवाब हो सकता है. तो मैं पढ़ता हूँ कि आज के दिन संविधान निर्माता डॉक्टर बाबा साहब भीमराव रामजी अंबेडकर की वह बात ज़रूर याद रखनी चाहिए. किसी भी देश का संविधान कितना भी अच्छा हो, यदि उसे उपयोग में लाने वाले लोग अच्छे नहीं हैं तो उस देश का संविधान अंततः गलत साबित होगा. और किसी भी देश का संविधान कितना भी बुरा क्यों न हो, यदि उसे उपयोग में लाने वाले लोग अच्छे हैं तो उस देश का संविधान अंततः अच्छा साबित होगा. अब आगे जो मैं बात बोल रहा हूँ उसी के ऊपर आपका कमेंट चाहिए कि डॉक्टर अंबेडकर ने इशारों में ही एक बड़ी बात कह दी है कि जिसे शायद हम सभी लोग आज तक समझ नहीं पाए. उन्होंने कह दिया कि व्यक्ति को केवल नियमों और कानूनी दस्तावेजों से नहीं चलाया जा सकता, व्यक्ति को स्वयं में परिष्कृत होना चाहिए, व्यक्ति के भीतर प्रेम, दया और करुणा होनी चाहिए और व्यक्ति की चेतना सतत जागृत रहनी चाहिए। यही कारण है कि एक तरफ तो डॉक्टर अंबेडकर संविधान निर्माता हैं और दूसरी तरफ धर्म के प्रस्तोता। याद रहे, वे बुद्ध के प्रचारक हैं, बुद्धिज्म के नहीं। धन्यवाद सर, इस पे आपका कमेंट चाहूँगा।
बहुत अच्छा है। Ambedkar has said that we have not written in the constitution, it should be in the hearts of people, and my belief is that he trusted our people, and I think the time will come, the little bit of a strife here and there is all right, but then he has recognized that those who will have that character in the heart will run the government and make the ideals of the constitution be realized. That's it. That undoubtedly your statement is fully in line.
Otherwise, we would have loved to take many more questions. So now I would like to request our librarian, Mr. Premchand, to present Institute's publication to Honorable Justice P.S. Narasimha ji before the formal vote of thanks. Now I invite Mr. Premchand for the formal vote of thanks.
Honorable Justice Shri P.S. Narasimha ji, respected Chairperson Madam Professor Shashi Prabha Kumar ji, respected Director Professor Nageshwar ji, distinguished fellows, friends from media, and employees, ex-employees of the Institute, a very good evening to all. It's my privilege to propose formal vote of thanks on the occasion of 25th Radhakrishnan Memorial Lecture. I, on behalf of the Institute, express my sincere thanks and gratitude to the Honorable Justice P.S. Narasimha ji for accepting our invitation to deliver 25th RKML lecture in this historical and iconic building. Sir, we feel extremely blessed and fortunate to listen to your excellent speech on constitutional fraternity and critical aspects of rights and use of power by state for making laws. So you emphasize concept of fraternity and need to redefine the fraternity to resolve the conflict. It was truly inspiring and memorable lecture. Thank you very much, sir. An event of this dimension cannot be held overnight. Wheels started rolling months in advance when Professor Shashi Prabha Madam proposed the name of the speaker for RKML lecture. Madam, it's your effort. It's because of your effort that we could organize this event in Shimla, despite having certain constraints in the campus. Thank you very much, Madam. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to Chairperson Madam for guidance and support. My sincere thanks to Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, Director, Indian Institute of Advanced Study, for his support, encouragement, and guidance at various stages of organizing this lecture at IIAS Shimla. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all my colleagues, especially our section officers, for their valuable contribution, who work very hard to make this event a grand success. I especially thank Dr. Meenu Agarwal, Mr. Rabinder Saini, Mr. Narendra Chauhan, Mr. Akhilesh Pathak, and Madam Vijay Lakshmi, who all have contributed immensely to make this event a grand success. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all the media persons for extensive coverage of this event. I thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, sir. This is my turn to thank you now. So now kindly rise for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Now fellows and associates can assemble outside in the lawns for the group photograph, and rest of the audience can join us for a cup of tea. So thank you very much.
अच्छा